Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Konstantin Kogun. We're here at Holistic Investments, and I'm delighted to have an amazing guest with me today, Dennis Porter. He's a CEO and co-founder of Satoshi Action Fund and president and founder of Satoshi Action Education. Dennis, it's a really pleasure having you here.
Great to be here, Constantine, and looking forward to the conversation. Appreciate you having me on the show.
Yeah, I mean, it's an honor. We had an interesting encounter. We actually met at Twitter Spaces and our friend Scott Melker, and then I was listening to you obviously before, and I was following you on Twitter for quite a while, and that had occurred to me, oh my God, like we should have this more profound talk because I know you have incredible work done, a lot of states, like Strategic Treasury Reserve, I should say is one of your accomplishments to push the legislations and work directly with the top senators and governors. But traditionally, I should throw a legal disclaimer that this content is for informational purposes only, and you should not construe any such information or other material as legal, tax, investment, financial, or any other advice. So now it cannot be cut out from the interview, and we can start. I want to start with you, Dennis. Like I know that you did a tremendous job working on, this educational part, this legislation part, but like I want to learn a little bit like how did you even find, the Bitcoin and Web3? Why did you find it appealing? What you did before?
Yeah, it's a great question. In 2017, I had a friend mention the word Bitcoin to me for the first time ever. I'd never heard of it before. And he told me that Bitcoin was perfectly anonymous internet money. And I had said, no way, that's possible. Nothing on the internet is totally anonymous. And so I really just began to research Bitcoin to prove my friend wrong that this thing could not possibly be perfectly anonymous. Lo and behold, after studying it for some time, I discovered that he was in fact wrong. Bitcoin is not perfectly anonymous, as we well know amongst Bitcoiners today and in the broader digital asset ecosystem. However, it does have great privacy enhancements. I will say that over the traditional financial system. But while I was in there trying to prove my friend wrong, I was learning about all the deeper inner workings of Bitcoin, how it functioned, how it was able to be used. And I began to fall in love with a variety of different aspects of the technology. Ultimately, the biggest thing that really drew my attention was the ability to be able to bank the unbanked and to be able to provide financial services for people globally. I mean, today there are roughly 2 billion people worldwide who do not have access to safe banking or to a stable currency that they can utilize to save in. So Bitcoin is this fundamental step change in the way that we view finance and the way that we view access to finance. And that was something that drew me to the technology, made me realize that I need to be spending a lot more time learning about this technology. And so I went way down the rabbit hole, started mining Bitcoin in my basement, really enjoyed the entire process, was about to go all in on Bitcoin mining, but the market crashed in 2018 before I could make that call. And ultimately I decided, you know what, I don't know enough about this technology yet, so I'm going to continue to study it. I'm going to continue to learn about it quietly. I didn't have a Twitter account. I didn't have anything on social media. And so I was just continuing to study the technology and learn more about it as much as I possibly could, because I knew that this was world-changing technology. And so some time went on, and eventually I decided to start speaking about Bitcoin. I had been studying it for about 3 or 4 years, and in about 2020, 2021, when we were all shut down in our homes and we were all being forced to stay home all the time, Clubhouse booted up, and there was an opportunity for me to jump in there and start talking about the technology, start talking about Bitcoin publicly. I became very popular for that. Eventually launched a podcast off the back of that, and had some great experiences in the space, sharing the message of Bitcoin, and also bringing on a lot of guests. I had some of the top people in the entire space. Everyone from Scott Melker himself to Michael Saylor on my podcast. And then eventually from there, I was paying attention a lot to the political side of things. And I wanted to help Bitcoiners see that we needed to become more politically active. We needed to become more politically engaged. I mean, it's like crazy. In the early days, everyone was like, "Oh, stay away from the government. No, we don't need to talk to the government." But you might not like politics, you might not like the government, but the government is certainly interested in what you're doing. And even though Bitcoin might be separate from the political system, we are not, as human beings. We are still beholden to the laws of the land. And I wanted to make sure that the United States was the best place in the world to be a Bitcoiner and a Bitcoin miner. And that takes political engagement. That takes being politically active. We've seen some of the most important moves in Bitcoin's history because of political decisions. El Salvador, the nation of El Salvador, adopted Bitcoin. The president made that decision. So if we want to see our country be more like El Salvador, if we want to see the United States be a leader on this technology, we absolutely need to be politically engaged, because the opposite of that is we have a government that's hostile to Bitcoin, which we did have. The recent government was hostile to the technology. Now we're seeing a shift in the way that this technology is approached. And I'm excited to be at the forefront of leading that charge at the state level. We have 4 bills that we've passed into law now at Satoshi Action to be able to protect the rights of Bitcoiners, protect the right to self-custody, the right to run a node, the right to peer-to-peer transactions, the right to buy, sell, trade Bitcoin and digital assets. And we're not going to stop there. We have more states coming. This is just our 3rd legislative cycle. We are probably one of the most efficient political organizations in the world when it comes to passing legislation and advocating for our cause. We have done so much work with state lawmakers all over the country. In fact, every state lawmaker in this entire country, as of 2024, because there's a new batch that comes in 2025, but in 2024, as of 2024, every single lawmaker in this country has gotten either a book from us or they've gotten a letter from one of our advocates. And so we're proud to be leading that educational charge, and we are going to continue to push forward and continue to fight for things like not just like Bitcoin rights, but also for the ability to have states buy and hold Bitcoin in a strategic reserve.
Wow. First of all, I love your passion. There's a lot of passion, and this is the most important. You can clearly tell that you live with this purpose in your veins, and this is truly inspirational. But you also touched upon a lot of topics, so let's unpack them one by one. So first of all, you touched upon a very interesting thing that El Salvador. I wanted to ask you this question, so you already front run me here. So they went a little bit further, right? They accepted Bitcoin as a legal tender, right? And then, obviously, strategic reserve is part of it, right? So maybe for people who heard of this for the first time, let's explain a little bit the difference between the strategy that El Salvador accepted and what we're trying to do in the United States.
I mean, I would love to have legal tender here in the United States. That would be great. Unfortunately, that is going to take a change to the Constitution, or it's some serious legwork in order to get across the finish line. I think the biggest thing, really, though, is when we're looking at Bitcoin, is finding the ways that the United States can lead on this technology. I certainly believe the United States can have a strategic Bitcoin reserve that doesn't require legal tender in order to do that. But I would love to see the United States have its own strategic reserve. We're high supporters, big supporters of Senator Lummis. In fact, I sat down with Senator Lummis twice in the recent days, once for a Twitter Spaces, and then once for a 45-minute interview, which is coming out pretty soon here. But
Mhm.
ultimately, we are strong supporters of her legislation to establish a strategic Bitcoin reserve within the United States. And also, at the same time, we want to make sure that the United States is a big leader on Bitcoin mining. Bitcoin mining is a very powerful tool for balancing the grid, for enhancing clean energy, for mitigating methane emissions. It is this groundbreaking piece of energy infrastructure, is what we call it. Oftentimes, people look at Bitcoin mining just as a data center. It is so much more than that. No other data center can participate in energy arbitrage and energy opportunities the way that Bitcoin mining can. I mean, our grids are they're having problems. The grids are terrible right now. I mean, you can ask anybody that's an expert that we're having serious problems with the way we manage our grids. And Bitcoin mining is, in my opinion, and the opinion of many energy experts these days, one of the most powerful tools that we can use to be able to balance the grid. And at the federal level, there's a common term now where they say grid security is national security, because as we enter a world where the digital universe is more important than ever, we need to be protecting that access to the digital universe, and also the way that the digital universe interacts with a lot of our infrastructure. So it's so important that we make sure that we protect our grids, stabilize our grids, and Bitcoin mining is a powerful tool to do that. I think that is one great way the United States can show leadership. We are an energy hub. We are an energy powerhouse, and we can want to continue to maintain that leadership and maintain our durability of our grids. But yes, certainly El Salvador is leading the way on legal tender. They led the way on building their first reserve, but I think the United States is closely behind, and we will see some progress. In my opinion, I believe we will see some progress legislatively on this front in 2025, probably sometimes in mid 2025.
So let's discuss also what is the difference between the bill that introduced by Senator Lummis, right? It's a historical proposal, right? To supercharge the US dollar and pay down the national debt, establishing strategic Bitcoin reserve. So Senator Lummis is from Wyoming, right? And Wyoming, we know already that they have the dream team. They have like one of the best bankers, one of the best like specialists who are coming from traditional finance. So, to demystify, like for everyone who's hearing this for the first time, it's not just like, a bunch of people who just like bought Bitcoin for the first time. Like it's people who worked on this legislation for years, right? You helped a lot, right? So let's explain the difference between the federal level, right, and Bitcoin Strategic Reserve, which is going to be adopted as per your post in 13 states.
Yeah, the big thing for us at the state level is we're always trying to achieve reasonable, achievable goals. We want to make progress. We don't want to shoot for the moon and then, essentially not be able to get what we want. I compare it commonly to the game of baseball. If you're swinging as hard as you can every time the ball comes, to be able to hit a home run, your strikeout count is going to be extremely high. And so we don't want to be constantly swinging as hard as we possibly can. Every once in a while we do, but usually you want to load up the bases, then you get your good batter on deck, and then you swing for the home run. Then you try to get a grand slam. So our approach at the state level is very different from what's happening at the federal level. The federal level is very thoughtful. They have to be very judicious, and they really have to think through every tiny little step and think about it from plan A to plan B and all the way till they get to the end as well. They gotta figure out how they're going to start and where they're going to end all in one bill. Well, for us at Satoshi Action, the approach that we are taking is to be able to establish the ability for these states to be able to buy Bitcoin and then start to have the process begin where we actually have them buy Bitcoin. So it's a step-by-step process that works very effectively at the state level, and we've been able to get that type of legislation introduced in, I don't know, I think it's like 15 states now. I'm losing track actually because every day there's a new state coming online. We just had Montana announce that
Mhm.
they're going to be investing up to $50 million into Bitcoin, digital assets, stable coins, and precious metals. And that's a very exciting thing to see. Most states don't even have a number that they're going to invest. They just say, we are going to enable the treasurer to be able to allocate into Bitcoin, and we're going to start building our own strategic Bitcoin reserve, digital asset reserve, as well. So very excited about the future of what's happening at the state level, very different from what's happening at the federal level. But at the same time, the end goal is to have the states, just like the federal government, buy and hold more Bitcoin.
Yeah, by the way, breaking news about Montana, like I think you've just informed me. I didn't know about that before today, so really excited that people are actually putting their actual numbers, which helps to plan. But let's I want to like pick your brain and like help our listeners to understand the details, right? Because the devil is in the details. What is like said in the Senator Lummis legislation that the idea, the number one, establish decentralized network to secure Bitcoin vaults operated by the United States Department of Treasury with statutory requirements ensuring the highest level of physical and cybersecurity for the nation's Bitcoin holdings. So let's comment one by one. Like how would you explain it in layman terms? What does it mean for an average investor?
I mean, the way to look at the Lummis bill, which is a great bill, and we're very supportive of it, is to think about it as a way for the United States to establish a reserve and to have robust security protocols in place, and then to be able to also buy Bitcoin it's a 5 year period. Over a 5 year period, they'll be buying a million Bitcoin, which is the current way the legislation is written or the bill is written, and then it also makes sure that the Bitcoin is held for a minimum of 20 years. When I sat down with Senator Lummis in Washington D.C., she made a really strong comment that she felt that this was her way to be able to fix a lot of the wrongs that were created through the monetary system that has been expanded and the money that has been debased and the negative impact that has had on society. I think she said that she feels that this is her way of fixing and righting that wrong, where her claim, not mine, that the boomers and like the previous generations have not really been responsible with the way that we manage our monetary system. I mean, the amount of money that we have been printing over the last decade is incredible, is insane. It makes everything from the ability to go to college, the ability to buy a house, also expensive. I mean, I have family members who can barely afford to be able to get into their first house because it's so expensive. It used to be that you would save up the money that you need to be able to buy a house by living with your family members. Now it's like people have to save up to be able to move out to rent a house because they can't be able, it's so expensive. It's so out of control. These are the impacts of a monetary system, which has not been judiciously, which has not been responsibly managed. And the next generation and the generation after that is going to suffer unless we can get our debt under control and our spending under control. And I certainly believe that Senator Lummis's bill is a great way to be able to help us get back in control of our monetary future.
Well, when I was reading it, like two things obviously popped up. Like when I was sharing with some of my friends, like obviously it's an amazing tool, as you mentioned, hedge against inflation, diversification, and like emphasizing the store of value. Like, I would say also establishing Bitcoin as a new like digital gold, like or gold 2.0 is like its famous saying, right? So, technological, financial innovation, many other positive aspects. But I want to also address some of the criticism, right? Because those are the main points how people should learn from you how to demystify, like, So a lot of the people, what I was reading the comments, like when it was published, like that people are concerned about the volatility of Bitcoin, right? For example, in the past years, like some of the ups and downs like were 25% down, 30% up and down, right? So they don't understand how would that actually provide the hedge against inflation. So can you please explain like and demystify this first point?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing to do is actually take a look at the data. I mean, the dollar, we did a whole paper on this. The dollar has lost 25% of its purchasing power since 2018. If a state, and this is the reason why I frame it this way is because this is the way we wrote the paper, but if a state were to have allocated even just a small percentage, like 3% is the number that we chose, or not that we chose, that we found, if states were to allocate just 3% of their funds that they hold on hand into Bitcoin, they would have been able to protect themselves from that 25% purchasing power loss. And so, yes, Bitcoin might be volatile, but it's volatile over time and up to the right. We are seeing the dollar lose purchasing power over time, and it's volatile. It's with little volatility, losing purchasing power over time. Bitcoin has more volatility, but it's gaining purchasing power over time. And it's the best performing asset over the last 10 years. It's not even close. And so you certainly want to be able to give a tool into the toolbox of lawmakers and state treasurers to be able to use this tool of Bitcoin to protect themselves from the runaway monetary debasement that has taken place and that will continue to take place because we have to keep printing money. We can't stop. We have to keep printing money. And so we need to be able to protect ourselves by having a small amount of Bitcoin, which is sort of inversely correlated to the amount of money that's being printed. The more money that's being printed, the more Bitcoin goes up. And so if you are in a world where you have to be forced to print money, well, why not buy a little bit of Bitcoin because that's going to be taking place?
Yeah, so the deflationary nature of Bitcoin, because there's only 21 million that's ever going to be like minted, right? I think that's another amazing like tool to explain people like how it can be a real hedge. Now,
Yes.
the second notion that and the second concept that I was like reading is obviously regulatory and legal uncertainty. So people still are not familiar with some of the papers that, and obviously we're going to share your paper so people will be able to like read it more and like your official position. But maybe in also in like short version of the summary of like how would you help people to overcome the challenge that they think that it's not regulated or it's like used for some illicit activities like how would you explain the stance of SEC, FINRA, CFTC, like how do they look at it?
Yeah, I mean, one thing to keep in mind is that Bitcoin internally, right? Because there's external regulation that we try to regulate Bitcoin and the digital asset ecosystem, and there's tons of regulation around Bitcoin and digital assets. There's going to be even more coming. But internally to Bitcoin, Bitcoin is one of the most tightly regulated monetary units in the entire world. I mean, just look at how tightly we regulate the size of the blocks on Bitcoin. For those that aren't familiar, the block size on Bitcoin is very small. We do that for a reason because we want to protect decentralization. It's, without getting too technical, if you have huge blocks, you have huge amounts of data. And if you want to store that data, and it's a lot amount, it's a huge amount of data, it's a large amount of data, you're going to have a bigger computer. And that computer is going to become expensive if it's a large amount of data. And so by keeping those blocks small, we keep the amount of data we need to store the Bitcoin blockchain small, and we enable more people to run the Bitcoin code and we enable more people to participate, which increases the decentralization of Bitcoin. But we tightly regulate that. It's extremely regulated. And some people also like to talk about how the supply of Bitcoin is tightly regulated. There's only 21 million Bitcoin. There'll never be more. Changing that would be nearly impossible, if not completely impossible. And it's super regulated. So when people ask me like, "Oh, Bitcoin's unregulated," well, no, it's self-regulated. The monetary unit that you are using in Bitcoin is one of the most highly regulated monetary units in the entire world. It's just regulated by the users,
Mm.
and the users decide what happens on Bitcoin, and they've decided to fight for the defense of the supply. They've decided to fight for and regulate the hell out of the block size to protect decentralization. So if people tell me, Bitcoin's not regulated, I just don't think that they have taken a look at the code yet.
Yeah, 100%. There's another, since you've touched upon it, like, a very important topic, like in this legislation by strategic Bitcoin Reserve, there is one of the points that I will quote: affirm self-custody rights of private Bitcoin holders and emphasize that the strategic Bitcoin Reserve shall not infringe upon individual financial freedoms. Now, the criticism that went actually from Bitcoin Maxis, they said, well, you're looking to buy 5% of the total supply, and there's a lot of old private companies and, big asset managers who already hold 1%, 2% of Bitcoin supply. So wouldn't it actually take away the power from the people and lead to more centralization? So how would you debunk this myth?
Well, supply centralization doesn't have anything to do with the control of Bitcoin. It's the control of Bitcoin is the node runners, the users, and to a degree, the miners. But holding more Bitcoin doesn't mean that you have more power over Bitcoin. Certainly, you could, decide to sell a bunch of Bitcoin and crash the market if you were some huge holder. Um, but that's like saying like someone who holds a lot of gold, like the U.S. government's going to like sell all their gold one day and crash the market of gold, which I think some Bitcoiners would love to see them sell their Bitcoin or sell their gold for Bitcoin. But even if they were, I mean, I would be perfectly fine with buying all of the Bitcoin that they're selling. I mean, Bitcoin goes down in price. To me, I love it because I can buy cheap Bitcoin. I think a lot of people think, that all the Bitcoin maxis and all the Bitcoiners out there are just waiting for the time to sell. It's like, no, we're always waiting for the time to buy. And the time to buy is when Bitcoin is cheap. So I love when Bitcoin goes down in price. And I reject the notion that anybody controls Bitcoin if they have any centralization of the supply whatsoever. And I mean, it's really well dispersed anyways, too, as well. So like if you look at gold centralization, it's much higher than Bitcoin centralization.
Yeah. Actually, one of the research papers I was reading recently, it says that 69% of Bitcoin actually belongs to retail investors across the world. So it's probably one of the most decentralized asset on planet Earth. So like,
Yeah, and if you look at the stock market, it's like the 50% of the stock market is owned by like three people or something like that.
three,
Or
three
top, or
biggest
maybe
asset
it's
managers. Yeah. It's
yeah,
basically
it's nuts.
BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. Like three biggest asset managers control $30 trillion worth of stock. So biggest S&P
Yeah,
500
so
companies. So yeah.
it's not even close.
Correct. So, by the way, what was another question which I was collecting from the audience before our interview was interesting. So people are asking like, okay, so when, as a government, we're committing to buy, let's say in the United States, like 1 million worth of Bitcoin, that means on a balance sheet, we need to sell something. Like, would that be gold? Would that be like treasury? So do you have some intel on this part?
Yeah, I mean there's a variety of different approaches that have been taken or been thought about. Some have thought about selling the gold. Some have thought about revaluing the gold that's currently held because the value of the gold is like it's like very valued like $42 or something like that right now, and the price per ounce of gold is over 2,000. So you could do an accounting trick and revalue the gold and then use that to buy Bitcoin. That's what some people are theorizing is possible.
Mm.
For me, at the end of the day, I'm not in the business of crafting that legislation for the federal level. And so I'd certainly love to find ways where we don't have to raise taxes or use taxpayer dollars to be able to buy the Bitcoin.
Now, talking about you were talking about the mining and how actually it improves the greed and efficiency of like electricity consumption across the world. I was speaking actually to one of the Texas regulators and like people who work in Texas Blockchain Association, and they explained me in practical examples that actually like it's the opposite. It improved incredibly the greed. So One of the concerns that people have is a common myth about environmental impact, like because of the proof of work, the consensus mechanism, people think that, the transactions there requires massive computational power, hence it's resulting into high energy consumption. So, like, I know that you speak to a lot of miners in multiple states, or so maybe can you bring us like one case study how actually the opposite it improves the grid?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the state of Texas, there's a very large amount of Bitcoin mining there. When China banned Bitcoin mining, a lot of the Bitcoin mining flooded into Texas. But there's really two big important events that occurred just before and just after that migration of the Bitcoin mining. In several years ago, I believe it was like 2020, 2021, in Texas, there is two important events to take into mind. There was Winter Storm Uri and Winter Storm Elliott, which were both on either side of that Bitcoin mining migration from China to Texas, predominantly to Texas. And in Winter Storm Uri, there was a huge winter storm that pummeled the grid, and hundreds of people died. There was billions of dollars of damage done to the grid there. And afterwards, they started looking for new ways, new innovative ways to be able to protect the grid and to harden the grid to make it more resilient to these types of events. Well, if you transport roughly about a year later, all the Bitcoin miners started to come and plug into the Texas grid. And then shortly after that, you have a Winter Storm Elliott hit the Texas grid. It's very similar to Winter Storm Uri. It was very strange to have them back to back like this so quickly.
Mhm.
And when that Winter Storm Elliott hit, the Texas grid had a bunch of new tools in its toolbox, including Bitcoin mining. And what happened was all the Bitcoin miners, almost all the Bitcoin miners in the entire state, wound down during that event, during those peak demand moments, to be able to make that power available to the grid during the emergency that was taking place. They delivered roughly 1,700 megawatts of power back to the grid in the middle of an emergency when everyone else is trying to keep their homes warm, keep the hospitals running. The Bitcoin miners wound down and gave that power, made it available back to the grid. So, and to put it in context for people that don't know how much power that is, it's an incredible 1,700 megawatts of power is an incredible amount of power. It is enough power to heat 1.7 million small homes. It is enough energy to energize over 320 large hospitals. So while again, everyone else was just trying to stay alive, the miners wound down and made that energy available in the middle of that emergency to the Texas grid, ultimately, in my opinion, saving lives because no one died outside of people that were already sort of like homeless, living outside. There were some homeless people that unfortunately passed away during that crisis, during that event. But nobody that was like living indoors was unable to keep themselves warm enough to survive, and there were no known casualties due to the loss of electrical infrastructure, which is the opposite of what happened with Winter Storm Uri, where over 700 people died. So certainly there are real world examples, that being the biggest one. But we see all over the country that Bitcoin miners are winding down to deliver power back to the grid when the grid needs it the most. That is an extremely valuable service to the grid. It's essentially called demand response. Basically, the premise is instead of building additional infrastructure like peaker plants or batteries to be able to help support the grid during a crisis, you have customers of power sign up and say, well, we will wind down, we will make our energy available to you. Usually there's some sort of an incentive involved, of course. Nothing happens for free in this world. But at the end of the day, that incentive is much more affordable. It's a fraction of a cost of building additional infrastructure like peaker plants or batteries. So this Bitcoin mining is providing this incredibly valuable service to the grid. And it's also economical for them because there is typically some sort of program or incentive in place. In Texas, they have things like for coincident peaks, demand response. There's also other ancillary service programs, which that's what a demand response program is. It's an ancillary service program, which are a basket of programs that enable the grid to stay balanced and to stay within rhythm as well.
Yeah. Thank you. By the way, this is a very inspirational story. Like I had a talk about it with Lee Bretcher. He's the president of Texas Blockchain Council. He shared with me very similar insights, but not this particular story. So really, really great, like learning this from you. So jumping into the next myth, so we go one by one. So security and custody, right? So people like sometimes are confused how would and where this Bitcoin strategic reserve will be custodied, right? And how would that be possible so that like it would never be hacked, right? Because people don't know that like for 15 years so far Bitcoin blockchain was never hacked, right? And they still have some myth that it can happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's you got a lot of different solutions. You know, for our legislation, we say that they should custody the Bitcoin or they should work with a qualified custodian. There's a number of different groups out there that do this today. I mean, even today, Coinbase currently custodies the digital assets in Bitcoin that are held by the U.S. Marshals. There are other groups like Anchorage Digital who do the same thing and have been for years been able to effectively help large government institutions and other groups be able to custody their assets. So there's a variety of different ways, variety of different approaches. You know, if the U.S. government isn't comfortable custodying their own Bitcoin, there are certainly solutions out there that can help them get into a good place. I think that we certainly should be working to have robust security protocols, custody protocols in place to make sure the United States government has the ability to control its own destiny when it comes to Bitcoin.
Yeah. Totally agree with you, and it'll be interesting to see how that impact, like once they pick the vendor, right? If it's going to be qualified custodian, I'm sure that will be like very, very beneficial for whichever company that will be, right? Now, jumping into like this, I think like one of the most important concerns, and actually it'll be really interesting to hear your stance on this, like about the critics that who argue that because of the public debt concern, because Bitcoin is a speculative asset. What they're saying is basically that the tying to nation's financial reserve to a speculative asset could even worsen the public debt concerns, right? So how would you reply to this concern?
Well, I mean, the data just proves them wrong. I mean, Bitcoin is, again, the best performing asset over the last 10 years, and it's only continuing to show adoption and strength, and that it is a powerful tool to help protect those portfolios of those states. You know, Bitcoin has a very good Sharpe ratio. It's very good at diversifying a portfolio, and it's a non-correlated asset. So when everything else is going to shit, so to speak, Bitcoin is there and can survive and is non-correlated to those types of potentially non-correlated to those types of events. And so we certainly believe that Bitcoin is a powerful tool for states to protect themselves over the long haul. Yeah, does Bitcoin go up and down quickly in the short term? Certainly does, but so do many other types of assets in the world. But very few of them are the best performing asset over the last decade.
Yeah, some of it when I was reading this Reddit th threads, like I mean, I know again, I don't want to go to conspiracy theories, but like let's imagine because on the one hand it's decentralized, but on the other hand there are still governments that have hold a big chunk of Bitcoins, right? We're talking about China, Kazakhstan, like and Russia. They still have a pretty big influence. And let's be honest, right now we're in the middle of almost like a economical Cold War where we've seen with DeepSeek, like what happened, like with the like fight with OpenAI. So what people are debating, like it's again highly hypothetical situation. What happens if those governments that are not very friendly with the United States and its allies, like if they would try to massively sell Bitcoin, which may hypothetically significantly impact, the national debt situation. Like, do you think it's even likely to happen?
I mean, if the US government, if it's holding Bitcoin and buying Bitcoin, that puts them in a great position to be able to shore up the market if there are other states or other countries that decide that they do not want to hold Bitcoin and they want to crash the market. I think the United States should be in a position to step in to be able to purchase Bitcoin to shore up the market in case there are attempts to essentially short the Bitcoin market ultimately, which could result in poor outcomes for Bitcoin miners who are becoming an integral part of our electrical grid system. So I certainly believe the United States should be buying Bitcoin and should be in the market to shore up should be in the market for Bitcoin to be able to shore it up in the case that there's some sort of national security attempt to go after Bitcoin and to be able to reduce the price of Bitcoin to negatively impact the United States.
Now, like in terms of like how people think about like Bitcoin as in terms of opportunity cost, right? People think about okay, there's a renewable energy technologies, like and like how big talking about like environment, like how big is the progressive like move to actually increase the renewable energy, like as opposed to like, some other like sources of energy which are not that, I would say, environmentally friendly.
Are you saying within Bitcoin?
Yes, correct. A lot of people are asking that, like, how clean it is, how green it is, like how uh like carbon friendly.
Yeah, I mean, naturally over time, in my opinion, the Bitcoin network is going to continue to get greener and more carbon friendly. As Bitcoin has been around, the hash price, which is an equation that shows the margins for Bitcoin miners, that hash price has crashed further and further down over time and is continuing to crash down. And that's going to force Bitcoin miners to pursue the lowest cost energy that they can possibly find. And the lowest cost energy is energy that no one is using. And there is more energy waste and lack of energy usage in the renewable energy sector than any energy sector on planet Earth. I mean, in California, their grid system there is called CAISO, California's ISO, and that state tracks through CAISO the amount of energy that is curtailed or wasted by wind and solar farms. Basically, the premise is that when you build a wind farm, you have to build it where the wind is strong, and typically that's not where a lot of people live. Or the same thing with solar farms. You have to build it in big, empty, open areas where the sun is bright, and there's very few days of clouds. And those areas, again, are just not typically where they end up being built is not close to city centers or demand centers where the power is sold. So they have to transmit that power over very large, what are called high voltage transmission lines. And these transmission lines are very expensive and very time consuming to build. So you'll have these wind and solar farms sitting where the wind is strong and the sun is bright for up to a decade sometimes without the capacity to sell their energy. That energy that they can't sell is wasted. That energy, that wasted energy is called curtailed energy. The state of California actually tracks how much curtailed energy they have every year, and they're on track by 2030 to curtail more energy than the bottom 36 nations use combined. And that's just in one state. So there's a massive amount of energy waste in the wind and solar space. And as Bitcoin miners and their margins crash, they're going to need to pursue this type of energy because they won't be able to pay for the same amount of energy that they're using today on the major grids as those energy prices become too expensive for them. If you're at 6, 7 kilowatts an hour, that's going to be too expensive in a very short period of time. Whereas if you go to a wind and solar farm where they don't have any sort of price for the power because nobody's buying it, and you can co-locate right next to the wind and solar farm because the unique thing about Bitcoin mining is that it can go anywhere. It is not geographically dependent like wind and solar. Wind and solar have to be close to where the wind is bright, or the wind is strong and the sun is bright, and Bitcoin miners don't. They can be anywhere on the planet that there's an internet connection. They don't even need a strong one. And so you can place a Bitcoin mine in the middle of nowhere next to a wind farm or solar farm that can't sell its power, and you can monetize 100% of that excess energy, ultimately resulting in a boost to the wind and solar industry, clean energy industry, while simultaneously reducing the carbon footprint of Bitcoin mining.
Yeah, that's actually very also like interesting trajectory, and I really hope that we're gonna go there slowly. But like as you mentioned, right, it will require like very rational pace, like and taking into account all the data that we amassed for within the 15 years. When do you think that it will, I think one of the questions which is very just pragmatic, when do you think it will actually come to force? Like I saw you mentioned that January should be that's this moment, right? I believe it's a little bit delayed, right? So when will we see it in action?
Is when will we see what in action? You said
Like the
talking about
Bitcoin strategic like reserve,
oh,
like
the legislation.
the
Yeah. So
legislation.
so Utah is probably going to pass this stuff pretty quickly. We'll probably see a few other states pass it pretty quickly. Texas looks like they're well positioned to be able to pass it, as well as a few other states. And so we'll probably see stuff at the state level pretty quickly, and here in the near term, within the next month or two. At the federal level, it's going to take more time. It's just a slower process. You have the 180-day report that was required by the president via his crypto and AI executive order. And that executive order, asked the variety of different government agencies to get together to speak to each other and to come up with a report within 180 days to outline what the legislation will look like for creating something, either whether it's the market structure stuff with stablecoin components, but also I think there will be a component in there with regards to a digital asset stockpile.
And then you, I think, like actually recently you've tweeted about the bill though to allow the state's pension to buy Bitcoin and introduce in the state of Indiana, right? So, can you elaborate on that, like, and how many other pension funds do you think will follow?
Well, we've been doing a lot of work educating state financial officers on the benefits of adding Bitcoin into the pensions. A lot of these pensions are underfunded, and a way for them to get back into a good footing would be to allocate a portion of their funds into Bitcoin. We've already seen a couple of different pensions allocate. I think it's been three so far that have allocated into Bitcoin via you. Typically, it's done via some type of ETF or exchange traded product, and we're going to see more of that take place. We have more states that are enabling their pensions to be able to look at the stuff and to continue to allocate into it. So I'm very bullish on the future of pensions, but also state treasuries in allocating into Bitcoin.
Any other like I would say developments like in the short term that you would, focus on and you would like, anyone who's listening to this like podcast in 2025, you would want them to look into, and what is your like prediction on what's going to happen like by the end of the year?
Well, I think by the end of the year, you're going to have 4 to 5 states that have passed some version of a strategic Bitcoin reserve bill into law. I
Mhm.
believe that you will have a crypto bill which enables a variety of different components to be going through the process. I can't say for sure if it'll be passed into law, but it certainly have those components in there with regards to a strategic digital asset stockpile. And then, of course, we want to see Senator Lummis's bill be able to take that Bitcoin that's held by that stockpile and put it into a strategic Bitcoin reserve where it is held exclusively on its own with no other digital assets alongside of it in that reserve.
Can we speculate a little bit, at least like on the quarter when you think it will be fully implemented?
Very hard to speculate on federal legislation. You have to have the stars align. And so, in order for us to be able to move this forward at the federal level, we really need to be working hard with lawmakers there on the ground, educating them on the value of holding Bitcoin and having Bitcoin in a reserve, and pushing them to be able to make sure that this becomes a reality. But thank God for Senator Lummis. She's chairing the new digital asset subcommittee in the Senate, and she is going to be having a hearing on this pretty soon, as she announced recently.
If you were, let's say, of course, we don't want to completely speculate, but if you were to bet, do you think it's realistic that it will be adopted this year?
A digital asset stockpile, yes. Um, a strategic Bitcoin reserve, less likely, but definitely possible.
Got it. And if I may ask, why did you mention that only 5 states will adopt it, not the like entire 13?
Just the process. I mean, it's very difficult to pass law. It's not an easy thing.
Hmm.
All sorts of different events can take place that can slow things down, get in the way. So we're just being cautiously optimistic about saying five, but certainly more states could do it than five.
And if you were to say the average like tenure like of how long it takes to adopt this like legislation, like I mean, we can say like from 3 months to 6 months. Is this accurate prediction
For the state level,
for the state level? Correct.
well, there's going to be probably something happening in the next month.
Okay. So at least we know that February will be a very positive month, and then
It
after.
should be, yeah.
Okay. And after that, like I know it's like talking like to a person who wants to say a lot of things but cannot probably because of the other concerns you have. Um,
Yeah, I got to be careful.
yeah, so I have to ask you in a smart way, right? So okay, so let's imagine 5 states. Obviously, like we have very positive, like I would say a very bullish like scenario of them adopting it, and the other, let's say the other 8, like in the coming year. Is this in like at least this prediction? Is it possible to gonna or you think some of the states, because of the internal policies, it may even go to 2026?
There, I think, you will see definitely states where it takes a 2 year effort. So that's very common. And we'll be continuing to fight to advance that legislation. I mean, we were very good at getting our Bitcoin rights bills passed into law in 4 states. And um, we're going to be continuing to pass it in more states where we tried in previous years. And we'll be getting it across the finish line. So there's a lot of times it's a 2 year or even a 3 year effort.
And is it fair to assume that after US actually will adopt like that strategic stockpile, strategic reserve, that many other states immediately will follow? Like we've seen Czech Republic recently, central bank announced it. We've seen like Switzerland announced it. We've seen like a lot of Gulf states like UAE and others like are like very supportive of this idea. So would that be like this litmus test, like when US, pass and it happens, like others will follow immediately?
Is there as more momentum is built, as more bills are passed into law, that creates more momentum for other states and the federal level, which is a big part of our strategy at Satoshi Action. We want to use the states as the primary mover on strategic Bitcoin reserve legislation, which will ultimately result in more momentum at the federal level. This is very common in the United States. It's a different model. Most places don't operate this way, but the states have a lot of ability to do things on their own here in the USA. And we want to be able to use that ability to pass this stuff into law at the state level, ultimately resulting in a lot more momentum at the federal level.
Yeah. And I know that obviously you consult with a lot of people across the world, not only the United States. So, can we also speculate a little bit that more countries will accept Bitcoin as a legal tender?
Legal tender is, that's one of those things I just think it's better for us to move away from that terminology because legal tender is a very difficult high bar to accomplish. And it's really about like, what are you trying to get out of that? Like, we want to make Bitcoin be something that they hold in reserve. Maybe we want to get rid of capital gains on Bitcoin. Like, those are things that legal tender in El Salvador did. It got rid of capital gains on Bitcoin. We want to do that. We don't have to do it through the legal tender process. We want to do it in the United States. We want to do it in countries all across the world. Ultimately, Bitcoin is money. It should be perceived as money and seen as money. Now, if people are speculating on it to make money as an investment tool, that's different. But if you're using it as money and as a form of payment, I don't believe that if you're 100% in Bitcoin, you live in Bitcoin, that's how you operate, that you should also be having to be tracking every single transaction that's going on. At bare minimum, we need a $200 de minimis exemption to be going here in the United States. I think that's possible to get done in 2025.
And now I need to ask you this question, and I know the answer, but it's still for the people. Like over 150 countries like are currently exploring developing their own CBDCs, right? What is your personal stance on central bank digital currencies?
I don't mind CBDCs for commercial use between banks. I just don't like the idea of a central bank digital currency that's forced upon retail.
Why? Can you elaborate a little bit?
I think that it's too much control. There'll be a political football. They're an invasion of privacy. But for commercial aspects, for banks using it, it's like Swift, right? Like if a bank wants to use Swift to send money from one bank to another, that's fine. Or if they want to use a CBDC to send money from one bank to another, that's fine. I just don't want CBDCs to be something that are forced onto the average American.
Yeah. Well, the beauty that President Trump is very aligned with your stance, right? So he banned quite recently. So I think like at least the 4 years were safe in the United States from CBDCs, right? But what do you think would be the implications where, let's say, 105 countries will actually put CBDCs into action? Well, do you believe there are some positive implications, like there'll be more liquidity in crypto because they will have to educate more regional banks, custodians, money transmitted, or like any clearing houses, like, or you see more negative impact?
It's really hard to predict the future of what these attempts to create a CBDC will do for the future of the world. I just don't think that they're that interesting. I don't find CBDCs to be interesting. I think that they, a lot of what they want to do, they can do through traditional database systems today.
Fair, I guess. Now, coming back to Bitcoin, where people can read more like about your initiatives, like where they can contact you if they want to cooperate, what are the other exciting things you're preparing in 2025?
Absolutely. And, thank you for having me on the show, Constantine. And if people want to look up our work, they can go to satoshiaction.io to look at the work that we've done in the past. And also a lot of our policies, our model policies are up there. We open source all of our model policy for anybody to use. And so that's a great place for people to go. We have a few resources on there as well, like a legislator guide for Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. So that's a great place for people to pay attention to. We also have the ability to sign up for our newsletter there. And then if they want to follow me on social media, that's where I post the majority of our work. It's at Dennis underscore Porter underscore. And then also for Satoshi Action, it's at Satoshi Act Fund. Unfortunately, the full version was not available. So that's a great place for people to follow us. And if people want to reach out via DM or email, both of those are available. Help at satoshiaction.io is the email for our team.
Perfect. And that is like will be all shared in, in the body of like and in the description. So one last question, which is more personal question to you. Like I always use this trick. I don't notify my guests about this question, but I think it's a very important question. Like people do what they do, like there is a certain meaning behind it, right? So what is the meaning of life to you, Dennis?
The meaning of life. Wow. I don't know if you're going to get a good answer out of me for that one. That's a question that I think is really too big for anybody to answer. But for me, I just live my life with uh, progress. I think if we can achieve progress and if we can achieve forward momentum and movements and wins, whether it be for Bitcoin or for other important verticals in life, that's the thing that keeps me going in life, and that's the thing that gives me motivation is to make that progress and make those wins.
Beautiful. Any book you can recommend, or maybe a podcast that beyond, of course, your own and the newsletter, or maybe something that for people to learn more about these initiatives?
Yeah, I think that people should read the Bitcoin Standard. I think they should read all the Bitcoin books that they possibly can. Anything that talks about Bitcoin, you should be reading it and forming your own opinions because everything in those books is not 100% accurate, but they'll give you, I think, a really important framing for how you should be thinking about Bitcoin and how you should be feeling about the future of money in the United States.
Bitcoin Standard, yeah, that's classics now. Okay. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Dennis. I really like appreciate what you do, and I hope people will follow you. I hope people would understand that the work you're doing is behind the scenes is like tremendously important. And whatever we're seeing, it's not just like okay, well, some new power, some new like government came into place, and that was built like in one term. No, that was like a meticulous preparation that you crafted like along the years with the team and I hope, that you will have inspiration to continue your work. And I hope that, everything that we talked about will come to fruition and that will help the world to get to be in a better place and hope that all the plans that we have in the United States to minimize the debt and make it as a store of value, Bitcoin, that will also like, prove itself as a successful socioeconomic experiment.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me on, Constantine, and looking forward to chatting again in the future.
Thank you.